I'll tell a little bit about my story as to where it's been for the last 20 years or so. I was working two or three jobs back in 1997 and 98 and was doing okay. Was married to a lady, and we had addiction problems and everything. And um, it got so bad to where she would go up missing or come out missing for weeks at a time, and it really got me bothered. And so one day I went looking for her, and where I found her wasn't a good spot and a good place, and it caused me to lose my temper and run up in there and cause a lot of havoc in my life. And due to that, I wound up in jail and was facing some prison time, and got caught for DWI along the way with that. So the sheriff of that county gave me an option to leave that county and never come back, but and he'd have all the other charges dropped, which at the time I felt like my marriage was over anyway. And so I had a DWI. He said I was going to have to own up to that DWI, and everything else he'd get took care of. And so I was on probation. They got the probation transferred to Guilford County area, Greensboro, North Carolina. And so I moved here to Greensboro, and I worked two or three more jobs while I was on probation to pay off fines and stuff like that that had occurred during the trouble. And so I got all that paid off. And during this time, my wife's family always found me through my Social Security number where I was working, and they would show up on my jobs bringing her, trying to get me to go back with her, and I didn't want that life anymore. I was through. And so whenever I got all my fines paid off and everything, my probation officer cut me loose. So I decided that I was going to go live on the streets, and either they would kill me or I would survive and they would make me. And so that was in the year 2000. And so for the next 12 years, I lived on the streets. I tried living in shelters, but I could not do that for very long. Most of it was 60 days or 67 days is all you could stay. And I didn't want to leave the area, so I moved out into the woods, met some Latino people from all over the world, and they became my family, and we made a camp and built a hut, and I lived in the woods for the next 12 years with them and different other people that would pass through and travel through up until the year 2008 and 9, whenever they was surveying to bring a greenway through downtown Greensboro, and they was surveying right through our camp. And I always said they tore down Paradise and put up a parking lot. And I just say that jokingly because really, with them finding us, met several ministries that did outreach for homeless people that way, and they continued to work with me. Uh, I became the voice of the homeless people for one of them. I went around the churches and spoke about homelessness and everything. And through that, God started opening up my heart to bigger and better things within me to know that I was His child and that things could change if I would just believe in Him and let His will be done and not mine. And so through a process of 2 or 3 years of doing this, finally in the year of July the 2nd of 2012, I threw up my hands and surrendered to God that His will be done and not mine. And I went into a treatment program. And from that day on, I let God's will be done. And I stayed in this program for a year and, like 21, 22 months, 23, somewhere around there. Was ready to exit out, had a paying job at the time, and working at a saw sharpening place, and was getting ready to get my own place whenever I was approached while doing homeless outreach at Church Under the Bridge here in Greensboro. And the man offered me the opportunity to run a treatment program in High Point for him that was getting ready to close the doors and go bankrupt. And I told him I had to pray about that because, and talk to my sponsor because I was in AA and I had a sponsor and I needed to speak with him to make sure it was a good move for me, which he told me I was crazy afterwards, but that's okay. God told me that's where I was supposed to be going because I prayed about it for 7 days, and God told me that's where you need to be, Mark, because that's where you can help the most people. And the reason why I say this is because the man offered me the job and the pay was room and board only. I was the executive director over this program in High Point. I run it like a business for the most part, the business part of it, plus also did intakes to help the men get into the program. We had a thrift store that I run. I also run a lawn care service out of there to help bring the monies in and help the place survive. With God's help and all this, I was able to, that was September of 2014, and by the end of that year, I was able to have a bank account with $25 in it and had some of the bills paid to where the bill collectors wasn't hounding them. And then the next year worked on it, and I was able to get $50 a week paycheck, which was I was grateful for it, and then eventually I became to where I felt like it was messing with my recovery, and so I felt like it was time for me to move on, and I started praying about what God wanted me to do in the next step, and that was to start my own business finally after about 6.5 months of praying and saving up all the monies that I was making from working at this recovery place. I saved up enough money to buy a pressure washer, in which God says you can start your own pressure washer business, pressure washing houses and businesses and stuff. So I did that and ventured out on my own in the year 2016. I resigned from there, and whenever I resigned from there, I'm not bragging or nothing, but God had worked with me and my story so much that they had $21,000 in savings and $3,000 in their business account whenever I turned it over to another man, and the house was all settled. Bills was paid, everything was taken care of. So I left it in good hands, and I moved on to run my own business of pressure washing and lawn care. That's been a year ago, and since that year, and the reason why I moved on, let me add this too, was because I was finally getting my driver's license back. I had not had a driver's license since 1992, and I was getting my license back, and I needed a vehicle, so I needed to kind of move on to get a vehicle, which a church had donated a vehicle to me, and I was grateful for that. I also had to pay for insurance for that vehicle and to have a machine put on there that is called the interlock machine to crank it up. And I do a lot of homeless outreach, go feeding and stuff like that in the mornings or evenings or sometime. And I'm also involved with a group called Tiny Houses Projects here in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the Guilford County area. Those are the kind of things that God's led me to do now. And I love working with the homeless people, and I try to work as many of them as I can possibly on jobs to where I can pay them a good wage and get them in a motel room for a while, at least for a week or two. I have picked up one man that I knew for a while and worked with him for the last 5 months. And he has gotten into housing through an Oxford House type situation. He's working another job, which he has been promoted and moved up. And that's what I'm talking about, taking one man at a time and working with them to get them stable and on their feet to where they can stay off the street, at least get off the street, and then work on staying off the street as they go. And that's where God's led me to now, and I'm very thankful for this day. Thank you all so much.